Hello everyone, it's Patty Behan and I want to thank you for tuning in today. In this video we're going to be making this beautiful shabby chic tag and I'll be using a ton of distress products here. I have some distress ink pads, new archival ink colors, new embossing glazes, and Ideology and Tim Holtz stamps and stencils. So let's get started. To begin, we're going to do all of our stamping first. I have this beautiful flower shop stamp set by Tim Holtz and Stampers Anonymous, and a Dina Wakley Media number 10 white tag, and some collage paper by Dina Wakley Media. And I'm going to do all of my stamping first and a little embossing. So I'm first going to take this rose stamp and put it on an acrylic stamping block. I'll be using some archival ink to color the stamp, some fired brick, and then rustic wilderness. And then I'll be doing some embossing using twisted citron and candied apple embossing glaze. And since archival ink is oil-based, you can emboss with it if you work pretty quickly. So I'm getting everything ready. I'm opening up my jars of embossing glaze. I'm getting some scrap paper ready so I can pour the excess onto that. And I'll start by coloring the stamp with fired brick, and I'll just color in the top of the rose here. And then I'll take rustic wilderness for the leaves and stamp it off to the side on the tag and quickly pour on the candied apple over the rose, and then move that aside and pour the twisted citron over the leaves. And once the embossing powder is on there, we can put this aside and return all the excess powders back into the jar, and then we can go ahead and use our heat tool to heat emboss the rose. And once that's done, the archival ink dries to a nice glossy finish, and that's going to help it stand out as we make our background later on. Okay, now that that's finished, we're going to put that aside and let it cool, and we're going to continue stamping. I'll grab that collage paper, and I'm going to use the same rose stamp, and I'm going to start with the rustic wilderness again for the leaves, and then the fired brick for the top of the flower, and just stamp it onto the paper. Now I'm going to take this script stamp and ink it up with some wild honey, and we'll stamp that once as well. Again, we'll set this aside and go on to the next step. Okay, so now we're going to work on the background of the tag. I'm using a Tim Holtz Collection lace stencil by Stampers Anonymous, and I'll place it flush on the tag like so, and then I'll be using the Distress Embossing Dabber, and I'll dab the embossing ink through the stencil, and first I'm getting it started. And then once the ink is flowing, we'll just dab the ink through the stencil. And you want to make sure not to scrub the ink on there, just dab it on there. Try to be gentle because there is a spongy top that you could scrub off if you press too hard through the stencil. Okay, and once that's done, we'll take a piece of scrap paper, and I'm using speckled egg distress embossing glaze over top. And make sure you get all of the spots. And you'll notice I didn't go real heavy on the embossing ink by the rose. This way it will stand out more. So now I'm melting the embossing glaze with the heat tool. And then you'll see as it is melting, it gets that pretty shine to it. And I'll bring it closer so that you can see that there. And we just have to let this cool a second because we're going to start working on the background. So I have my pieces here that I stamped before, and I cut them out close to the edge of the stamp. And I'm going to add some of my script writing at the top and the bottom, and the flower I'm going to turn over so that I have a reverse image. You can still see the stamping through the tissue paper. And I'm going to glue it down with some Distress Collage Medium and a palette knife. First, we'll put some collage medium on the back of the stamped image, and then we'll stick it down, and then we'll put some more collage medium on the top. But when you do that, make sure you're only getting the collage medium on the paper, because we're inking the background, and any collage medium that gets past the paper and on the tag will resist the ink. That could end up looking cool, but since this is a white background and we're going to grunge it up a bit, it might not give the results that you would like. Okay, so now we've let our tag dry and we're ready to ink up the background. I have some Distress ink pads, and I'm going to start with spun sugar, and then I have a mini ink blending tool with foam, and I'll make sure I get lots of ink onto the foam, and we'll just ink up the entire background using a swirling motion, and we'll just keep going until the entire background is covered. And then after that, we're going to add another color, and that's going to be antique linen. And then we'll go ahead and use some vintage photo after that. And we're just layering to create different colors. I'm adding some more spun sugar. And then last, we'll give it some walnut stain on the edges here. Okay, and once that's done, we're going to add some droplets of water and just lightly press the trigger so that drops come out instead of a spray. And we'll do that all over the tag, and then just let it sit a second. And when we put the water on, it's going to remove some of the ink. So I'm going to take a dry paper towel and just press it down onto the tag, and then you can see the ink is coming through, and it'll just lift off some of that ink to give it a little more interest and texture to your tag. And now that our background is done, it's time to add some words. And I'm using the Tim Holtz Ideology Clipping Sticker Book. I love this sticker book. It has the most whimsical, random sayings that are so much fun. And I'm going to apply these by using Letter It adhesive foam tape. This is a clear tape, and it'll just give it some dimension. I've already cut it in half, and I stuck it on the back here, and I just have to remove the liner tape. And once I do that, I'll stick it down towards the bottom, and it says the most beautiful thing, and this says after the last long rain, and I'll stick that underneath here, in the garden. And when I tell you I did not plan this, but isn't that perfect? The most beautiful thing after the last long rain in the garden, of course, is a rose. Okay, so next we're going to add a bow with some Ideology mummy cloth. And I've cut it the length of my craft sheet here, which is 18 inches. I found that's a perfect length to make a bow. And I'm just going to add a little distress ink to it to give it some color, just swiping some vintage photo randomly. I had some leftover ink on my craft sheet that I was rubbing in. Add some spun sugar, and then some walnut stain. And I think that looks good. And then I'll tie a bow by making some bunny ears and then pulling it through. And then I'll adjust it a little bit here just to make it pretty. And then I'm going to attach it with some Distress Collage Medium. I'll put a dot on the back of the knot here. And then we'll stick it on to the tag right there. And I think I'm going to trim that one edge a little bit. like so. Maybe a little more. Okay, and I think that's it. I have to say that I really love how this tag came out. It's so grungy, but yet it's so pretty and shabby, and I hope you like it too. So if you'd like to give this a try, we have a link to the full supply list in the description box below.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and click on the bell to turn on notifications.